day. And so I'm happy that still many of you have remained loyal to us, and so that you continued all the way through the 10 days, because it's not very easy, because it's a very intensive course every day, continuously. And so unfortunately, I could not attend everyone out of my administrative things. But I'm happy that it has worked out, first of all, with your participation and with the participation online. So those who are watching this in YouTube. And I'm sure all of you have at least something to take away from this lecture. And when you begin your research in philosophy, particularly in philosophy of science, so you have now some inputs. I mean, philosophy doesn't need much inputs. As Heidegger says, every philosopher thinks only one thought. But to think that one thought is very difficult. So philosophy is very, is reductionism. So finally you have to reach that one thought. So that's why we can always ask, what is this? Still you can ask, tell us, Fausto, Professor Philosophy, what is complexity? Yeah, so because that what question, ontology, is always very complex. I'm going to ask that today anyway. So thank you all, and those who watch this online. And so this was the first GIAN lectures, and because of that, everything had to be organized at such short notice. And a big thanks to Deepak. I must tell you this, because without Deepak's help, we wouldn't have organized this.
Of course.
We wouldn't have
done
this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and you did that so diligently, and it's very exemplary work, commendable, I would say. And also others, I'm so happy, and also thanks Fausto. And so this has a long history, because it started last year. It should have happened even much before. We applied much earlier, but then, as we all know, the bureaucratic hurdles, it took some time. But I must also thank the GIAN and also the JNU, our VC and rector, and all the administrative support we have, particularly Professor Satyapada Patnaik and Saurav Singhal. That was just amazing, and so we didn't have to arrange anything, so these all came. And just except for the accommodation, and that also worked out quite well with Aravali Guest House and all, International Guest House, and the printing and everything. So we have a good GIAN cell, and I told my colleagues to invite scholars from abroad, particularly from Europe, for us. Thank you all. I mean, it's kind of Danksagung, it's not a Thanksgiving, but I use this opportunity to thank everyone, and for the successful organization and participation, discussion of this lecture series. And today we conclude with the lecture, Understanding and Dealing with Complex Phenomena, Meta-Ontology and Transdisciplinary, with a hyphen in between, theoretically oriented approach. So with these words, Fausto.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Babu, for the whole project, for first the invitation and the cooperation, and also for the discussion we had outside the course. Thank you all for the present and the patience. I can easily understand that such theoretically dense stuff is not usually handled, and most of all in 10 intense days, by which you have to assimilate, and it's not easy to assimilate everything, but you have a long time after literature in order to explore further this horizon. Thank you to Deepak, of course, I repeat, and to the institution, that is the GIAN program and the GNU, and also to the technical staff that's very, very patiently and made us courtesy to assist to every session. So let's make just a step further what we say yesterday and before yesterday, because the things are intertwined. And let's just approach, but in a more theoretically oriented point of view, what is the relationship between complexity and transdisciplinarity, or form of not disciplinarity, let's say. Based on the 9th lecture, that's the yesterday lecture, the 10th lecture we will move toward a fundamental link from a theoretical and educational point of view, because as mentioned already yesterday, interdisciplinarity is ubiquitous today and useful also to become funds and research project. From theoretical and educational point of view, that between complexity and inter or transdisciplinarity. And we will say in which way we have to distantiate both. Starting from frame of understanding focused on this meta-ontological attractor, reading and categorizing complex phenomena from a meta-ontological and meta-theoretical perspective, we will begin to define philosophically and conceptually the link between complexity and the need for interdisciplinary approaches, the need. From this definition, we will endeavor to define the forms of multi-perspectival approaches to the complex from the point of view of a thinking capable of bringing together multiple disciplinary approaches and merging them into a new epistemic and educational dimension. Because what we learned from the yesterday lecture about policy making, that such policy making must be well informed, but cannot be unidimensional. And the education to expert, or even the education to the building of teams of experts that can orient policy making and informs well, just as a bit thing, policy making must be necessarily interdisciplinary. Okay? Go to define concepts such as interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, or metadisciplinarity in order to understand the complexity of contemporary world and global phenomena, as well to devise new strategies. The link mentioned above is essential. From this perspective, the necessary relationship between science and society introduced in the opening lecture will also emerge. So, let's read a text that you cannot find in English, unhappily. You can find in Spanish because it's maybe also in Chinese, but not in English. There is a sort of sum of texts of Edgar Morin recently translated in English, but this book is very, very important from educational point of view and make a sort of little revolution in the educational system in South America, in other countries, even in Europe, is not translated in English. La tête bien faite, that is the well-done or a well-shaped mind, if we will translate. Essential problems are never parceled, and global problems are increasingly essential. So, global problems cannot be parceled. That's just what we can just cut off from the claim. Moreover, all specific problems can only be posed correctly. We are in the dimension we discussed it also before of problem and not solving problem, but in order to solve rightly or the correctly problem, you have to ask the good question, that is to problematize rightly. All specific problems can only be posed correctly only in their context. And the context of this problem itself must be increasingly a global context. I must be able to enlarge the spectrum of my problematization. At the same time, the division of disciplines makes it impossible to grasp what is woven together In other words, the original sense of the term, the complex. The complex is what is woven together. And then go further, just in the introduction, the challenge of globality is therefore at the same time a challenge in complexity. In fact, complexity exists where are inseparable, such as the economic, the political, the sociological, the psychological, the affective, the mythological, and that there is an interdependent, interactive, and inter-retroactive, we mentioned here the feedback loops, web between the parts and the whole and the parts. The developments of our century and our planetary era are confronting us more and more often and more inevitably. Well, that is the problem. It's not just the recurrence, it's also the inevitability with the challenge of complexity that math has in a non-reducible and non-parcellable problem way. So then we name the famous word that we find in many project and education programs and so on, what we can name the beyond of transdisciplinarity. I bet that every one of us encountered already transdisciplinary approach, pluridisciplinary approach, interdisciplinary approach in such educational context. Now, more and more interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity as a quality of approaches is demanded from university and even from educational institutions. But we have many forms of the beyond of disciplinarity. That is the problem. And what we said before help us to guide ourselves in this universum and often in this empty rhetoric of inter or transdisciplinarity. Okay? Because if we encounter true and honest interdisciplinary program, also often we encounter just boxes of disciplinary issues put together in order to discover some result. So without leading thread, there's a Kantian scholar on a light fad. Okay, there is as I put something or some object in the box is not a complex system. If I put many disciplinary issues in a box, that's not interdisciplinary. Okay, it's just a sort of fashioning way to make no longer disciplinary issues. And in this case, it's better make strong disciplinary issues or disciplinary studies in order to spring to interdisciplinarity than afford such thing of potpourri or something like that. Okay, so the beyond of disciplinarity can also be a fashionable way and a very confused way to approach something that you are no idea of. Okay, for that you're not idea. Okay, that's all, even the problem, because today in the Western world everything must be inter or transdisciplinary because it's fashionable, because it's appealing. Okay, but it's not say that the people who design such program has a clear idea what it's about, and we come even on the aboutness. Okay, and then you can also realize how it's difficult to build in good interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary program, because you know the difficulty to catch or to grasp the aboutness of the complexity that they demand or for which they are established. Okay? So we have pluri or multi, inter, transdisciplinarity, and with this schema we will see there is a sort of shift between the forms of the disciplinarity and beyond. Again, a degree of collaboration between disciplines, and as I will also mention, in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, I took part as a senior fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies to a program named Interdisciplines, okay, or interdiscipline in French. And I can guarantee you that's ready to establish or to weave together the languages, the practices, and the minds of people coming from two near disciplines is not so easy. So if you find a program with 3 or 4 or 5 disciplines, put it together, you have to ask you, it is a box or there is a sort of leading thread, okay? Because the problem of the interdisciplinarity is how we increase the radar of collaboration, of possible collaboration between disciplines. It's not just in taking a course on X, taking a course on A, taking a course on another M, you have an interdisciplinarity. So there is a shift of degree or increase or decrease of degrees of collaboration, between disciplines. Disciplinarity, we have a compartmentalization, shared background, because we talk the same languages, we learn to handle with the same rules, the same practices, even the same ways of publication. We have a sort of disciplinary community built along 4 centuries, and self-reliance. Okay, so I can once studied, for example, one discipline, at a certain point, I'm able to orient myself. It's very, very basic, you know, how to filter, like for complex phenomena in the news, okay? For a discipline, I can filter information. If I read diagonal, so I take a reader and I scroll just a bit after 8 years of reading the same disciplinary bibliography, I can acknowledge, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, I can acknowledge if this is a good paper or not a good paper. I recognize the review, I recognize if there is a sort of peer review, and so on and so on. It's something that circulates in our cluster in a way, okay? Then we have a multidisciplinarity, this already, or the pluridisciplinarity. Shared topic, communication, but what is very, very important, and rejoin what we said in the previous lectures, we have a juxtaposition of perspective. It's like the box. Okay? We have a juxtaposition. You take in charge this sector, I take in charge this sector. Then when we are able to establish connection and a productive work in order to publish something or organize a conference, I will not be too critical or polemic, but this is also the pros of the word, okay? We reach it, and so on and so on. We have some research result. So you can also very critically ask which research result is to organize something on a topic that is just a name, okay? For which you have not an attractor. That is, you have not a point, in the best case, around your turning off, okay? Sort of salad fruits. Very nice, but, you know, it's not the main meal. Then you have the interdisciplinarity. It's a very, very naive and intuitive schema. There's not need. Do you have integration of disciplinary insights? And at this point begins the hard work. Cooperation and interdependence. That is, it's happened when beyond the label you given to a sort of general wishful topic of research, you begins to toss together, you begins to hybrid or hybridate the language, and then the difficulty is that you arrive at a certain point at the hybridation of your object, and then you shift from the dialogical to the structural problems, okay? So you must be able to think a sort of hybrid something as the aboutness we experience, okay, in order to wave together or to test together the languages. Because the dialogue pragmatically is the first presupposition of interdisciplinary work, but is the condition sine qua non, but is not what enables you to reach the goal, to have a clear idea what you're talking about. You put many scholars coming from discipline, and it is sort of like a joke, you know. Many scholars coming from different, very, very strong, very, very successful scholars coming from very disciplined around the table, and maybe we name the thing, the about, with the same name, but beyond, on the background, we understand just a parcel of it. Because my language, my law give me access to one ontology, and then I'm even not able, like in pluridisciplinarity or confused pluridisciplinarity, to think that the thing or the about can have another objective nature. From this perspective, I explain to you as policy making what is transdisciplinarity and complexity policy making after having determined what is a meta-ontological attractor or meta-ontological connects, because instead we can usually begin from problem of policy making, then go to transdisciplinarity. Everything is fine, everything dialogical, we encounter ourselves on a table. It's like the many jokes that appears in Europe, you know. You put German and Italian and French, the Spanish, and say, for me that is that, for me that is that, okay? And then it becomes sort of funny joke and so on and so on. But there is no work, there's a funny joke, okay? So when you approach or you face the among disciplinarities, you face the problem. Because your forma mentis must be able to go beyond the binary association between a language, a discipline to handle with this language, literature, methods, reviews, etc., and the object itself. Okay? And then we have transdisciplinarity. There is just another degrees of collaboration, not just interdisciplines, that is a sort of epistemic context, but also with languages, practice, and frames that are more practical in the society. Okay? The transdisciplinarity means or needs that you go beyond your theoretical approach in order to interact with assumptions, even practices that are not the same, even if they belong to different disciplinarities. For example, evidence constraints. Okay? If you are a sociologist, if you have a climatologist, if you are, physician, in different view with different spectrums of evidence, they know what is evident in their context, disciplinary context. They know that they can analogically anticipate that if my evidence needs are not the same of the physician, but the physician has evidence needs or the evidence constraint as such, but we move, if you will, in the beautiful play of dialogue among disciplines in science. Okay? If you go to a politician, if you go to entrepreneurship or the entrepreneurship clubs, also these regimes of evidence needed by knowledge, that is by theoretical approach, must be nuanced. Okay? The language is not the same, the time is not the same, because it's a matter of acting. Okay? So even the explanation must be most plastic, and so on, and so on. Okay? So, if I go, for example, speaking to actors of environment and ecology, I cannot expect the attention I expected from you in these 10 days. I cannot even program 10 days of course, okay? I cannot give the literature I gave to you, because you are in an academic context and your methods are also special temporalities that can be different from a physician to a sociologist and so on and so on, but it's protected from the need of acting, okay? We go to the society, the times of reflection shorten, okay? And the needs to become conclusion increase. What this means? Not that I have to be superficially, that my work, in order to present something acceptable in an academic scientific context, must be refined, that you need more work, as the strategies of which we spoke yesterday. More work on language, more work even on mimic, more works on supports, intuitively, not intuitively, and so on and so on. Okay? So the transdisciplinarity just a step further, but every step further needs more work. As we said yesterday, 1, 2, 3 strategies. Okay? Pluridisciplinarity don't need so much work. So we can pragmatically. Okay? But pragmatically without maps is not even useful. Okay? And then if you go interdisciplinarity, for the first time you have to work philosophically in order to know how you can weave together the threads. Then you have to work one-to-one, and it's very difficult work, and transdisciplinarity is a more difficult work. So people that have a vague idea of climate phenomena, for example, for one discipline, and go to talk to society, it can have a good result. But the sustainability of this result is very shortened. Not because the climatologist is not good, or because the physicist talking about climate is not good, but because there is no preparation work in order to go to another context of other purposes, of other regimes, discursive regimes, as society, entrepreneurship, and so on, and so on. Okay? So, I mean, this shift, we have, in a way, by coming back to the 6th chapter of the Unsimple Truth, we have to assimilate the integrative pluralism to education. And as well for yesterday, even today, I have to show the criticism beyond the wishful thinking, let's integrate pluralism, okay? How do we proceed to translate that integrative pluralism in education? Because if I have to put the good willing things, we have to establish a dialogue between discipline into education. Education will be a sort of container of everything and nothing, okay? And then the disciplinary people can say, no, please, instead of having this chaotic sum of disciplines that must just on the ground of we have to speech ourselves, it's better that I build my scholars strongly on my discipline. It's rational, if you will, is a good sense as good common sense as for reductionist approach. Okay, I will not refute it. A physician that have to choose, or climatologist or an anthropologist, or they have to choose between educate young people to a very strong capacity to interpret something and to put in program where on his own he don't arrive to recognize what is the shape of the totality. Just for things they can say no, better build good physician, good chemist, and then what comes after. Okay, so there is also strategically oriented. Let's build a very passionate, very methodical interdisciplinarity, is even able to open this program, even if you have more time to work to this program. Okay? So integrative pluralism, of course, but without the ending point of our structural approach, integrative pluralism remains a wishful thinking. What is integrative pluralism? You can find the last chapter of the introductory book on Simple Truth. The view of science that I've presented as implication for the ways in which we create, epistemology and policy. It takes the lesson from studying the science of the complex to conclude that in many domains, only non-reductive, integrated, multi-level, pragmatically targeted explanation will succeed. Thank you. It's already something, but it's, in my view, not enough. How they will succeed, why they will succeed, if there is no correspondence on a very, very strongly identified complexity in phenomenon itself. Explanation that take into account the complexity of the world, and even here, if you agree with me, you're not forced to. If you talk with these Greek words, the complexity of the world, I give this as title, so I agree, I share the feeling. But if you work with these slogans, you can also remain to that, okay? Account the complexity of the world and even, can you imagine a program on the complexity of the world? What is the university itself, okay? So it's impossible to build. Educational. So the clarity and the distinction of your mental frames or theoretical frames works on how, or that show how is well, if it's well made or not, if you apply this time not to policy making, but to education oriented to inform the policy making. If it's method of act, your tool reveals itself, okay, or toolbox reveals itself appropriate or not. Explanation that take into account the complexity of the world will be, almost by definition, more local and less global to reflect the context, the richness of the behavior of multi-level, multi-component system. In each area of science and life, what we have designated as context, sharing the causal responsibility for generating effects will vary. So then the question is wishful and integrative pluralism in educational approaches? Of course. We are not remained anchored to the old world of disciplinarity. But the question is, it is enough? That helps you even to think the life of knowledge in general. For example, in Nature, some years ago, appears this cover, interdisciplinarity, why scientists must work together to save the world. Very triumphal, very fine, we agree all, work together in order to save the world, we have the Avengers of science, and so on and so on. But it's not so easy as it seems, okay? So, because if you encounter a sort of multiverse of madness, like many populism and many issues come together, you have to have a frame of it. So, the first step we have to accomplish is to demystify the omnipresence of inter-transdisciplinarity, and to claim that inter-transdisciplinarity must be in every educational program. It's demagogy, okay? You cannot put into a box everything, okay? And you have to build the people, in my proposal, even by philosophy, that is not so unuseful, to shift from slowly, methodically, from dedisciplinarity to interdisciplinarity, a sort of evolution of your side of knowledge. So be careful if you find too much interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. Maybe it is just rhetoric, okay? Even the people that denies, like complexists, that denies the good of disciplinary education systems, no, the disciplinary formation. For example, I will never deny, I will never claim that a transdisciplinary program must be established on the bachelor, okay? Because if the people don't know how it is biology, how it is, and then what they bring to the dialogue, okay? I will even affirm, even for the PhD, we can also maintain bachelor as strong disciplinary, master as disciplinary with some openness or with some spectrum of affiliated discipline, and then we do PhD transdisciplinary programs, okay? So starting from the beginning for the unordered things brings people, and you bet on the future of young people that they can have a job, and then we will not have, okay? So it is not even very successful on the long term, okay? Demystify the omnipresence of inter-transdisciplinarity in space and time, would I say, okay? So the success of disciplinary science is acclaimed, and it is concrete. Let no throw to the waste box in order to assume the whole novelty, okay? Like the partiality of disciplinary issues, even in methodological connexes. Without the good disciplinary issues, we cannot construct something other. And then, now we know how to do, take it on the other side seriously, okay? There is a work that moves the rationality itself, or the project of rationality that we have, or the project of rationality that we expect from educational system, or from a culture, okay? And then it's very, very, today, like the lectures we made, it's very, very difficult to afford because we live in a world of products. So, if you claim for hard work, long terms today in every context, you're not so fashionable as to give the product. Then take interdisciplinarity seriously. Pluridisciplinarity exists, it can be afforded even by a state of facts, but take disciplinarity seriously needs to invest work in it and resources. That is, you can give to professors and students the possibility to more long times of assimilation. It's happened to me. For example, when I went in 2016 in a very, very hard circle of quantum theory, and I spent there was the sort of lunch seminar, and I spent the following 2 days with Ed Etches in order to consider myself an idiot, because even if I build it in physics and so on, at the transformation after the third transformation of operator, you're lost. Okay, if you handle with formulas and people brings you in pages of Hegel or pages of a sociologist, is lost equally. Not because one is more worthy as the other, but because the brain needs time to afford languages. It's happened when you go. It's the same thing that happens when you go to foreign program students in other country. You go to the lectures or you go to the language course, and in the afternoon you sleep because your brain and your body needs to assimilate it. So that is taking seriously interdisciplinarity. It's not just sitting at the table in order to say, for me, environment is it, for me, environment is that, and so on and so on. You toss nothing together. It's remained to the level of opinion, you know. Culture, even interdisciplinary culture, is so hard as agriculture. That's what I would suggest as a good family father, okay? It's not bad because you handle with concept, with things that are immaterial, the difficulty and the risk are minimalized. It's just the same thing as culture. There are long times, risks, changes on the road, on the way, and so on and so on. But then even consider what happens if you don't take it seriously. You move always in a vicious circle. What is the vicious circle? And it's happened with many people that claims interdisciplinarity at every moment. So you say, why you build an interdisciplinary approach? Because we have to do with complex phenomena or complex topic, or in the same way, multifaceted phenomena, for what they don't have any idea what is a multifaceted phenomena, okay? At least we have to share long time like discourse in order to have an idea how to this metaphor correspond a sort of matter of fact, okay? Or when you study complex phenomena, what is a complex phenomenon? A complex phenomenon is something that must be studied by an interdisciplinary approach. You cannot go out this vicious circle, okay? So you have a petitio principii in the definition of complex phenomena. You have the interdisciplinary approach to take into account what is something taken into account by interdisciplinary approaches. By interdisciplinary approaches, you presuppose the complex phenomena, the complexity of phenomena, but then you never decide what is a complex phenomenon and why a transdisciplinary approach can be ultimately, okay? So, what is in the middle? What can breaks, if you will, okay, this viscosity of of circularity, or this vicious circularity, to take generally another point of view, another stance, and this is a structural one. So we name something complex for this reason. I will not repeat. And the interdisciplinary approach don't follow the complexity of the phenomenon, because the complexity of the phenomenon is everywhere. Follow the structural feature of something named complex or identified as complex. What is the missing link in all such rhetoric is the structural approach. Okay? We have not to do with phenomena per se, because phenomenon is everything and nothing. Even a feeling in the face of my friend is a complex phenomenon, like climate change, but I don't have grammar in order to bring both together to a program, okay? And so on and so on. So what we did already is the structural approach, and then I will show how the structural approach helped to us get out from this circularity. There is sort of tautology. Of course, complex phenomenon is complex because it don't take place into a discipline, and of course, interdisciplinarity is needed because phenomena is more complex. This is a plate tautology, if you will, okay? And if you have some tools on theory of science and in theoretical philosophy that explore that, one of these is a very, very short book, but then the foundation more long. It was made by a sort of Greek philosopher that was in dialogue with Carnap, with Feyerabend, and so on and so on. That is Wolfgang Stegmüller. The structuralist view of theories, a possible analog of Bourbaki program in physical science. So, and the school of Stegmüller, I will spare you what is the Bourbaki program. The Bourbaki program, Nicolas Bourbaki was a non-existing author in mathematics. It was a school of, one of the best schools for mathematics in France, okay? But there is no single person. There is the name for a group, changing with people going out, coming in, and so on and so on. And consists in giving a sort of mapping and translation feature between branches of mathematics without interesting themselves to the ultimate foundation, okay? It's just a sort of cartography. Rewrite mathematics in order to switch from one field to another field and maintain sort of family affinity and so on and so on. Without, and this is very foundational approach, beyond Frege, beyond Dedekind, and so on and so on. And one scholar of Stegmüller developed what I applied also to my meta theory. I will explain it after. But this is simple. But now we know the grammar. Take the theories as graphs. Okay? So let's take it's appeared in a very, very good paper, 2018, that show how interdisciplinarity for innovation processes in knowledge can be modeled. Okay? Network dynamics of innovation processes, that is, take not disciplines or theories as bricks or pyramids, okay, like in the foundational view, but as evolving networks, okay, and interacting networks. So you can imagine yourself that a theory can be conceived as a network. There is modular, there is plastic, that entail many phases of evolution, clusterization, and so on and so on. All the dynamics that we can recognize also in other kind of networks. And in this case, the connection will be easier, because you have not to put in relation two blocks of stone, because two blocks of stone in the conception of disciplinarity will never integrate themselves. Okay? If you take the discipline or the theory more epistemically as a building blocks of knowledge in the sort of architectonic or architectural way, you can never think something as an interdisciplinarity. So, because either you melt both together and you build a new one, but you not operate locally. If you conceive the disciplines in which you live and you approach the world as networks, that is, as modular, plastic, evolving or involving, okay, structures, then you have to think the disciplinarity, the interdisciplinarity. Why? Just because if I have one theoretical structure or one that orient, of course, the discipline, because the discipline is not a discipline because it's a sort of conduct of life. A discipline is discipline dictated by the matter described from the theory. You have the theory A, you have the second theory B. I go not too further, is enough for us. You can find interdisciplinary links between this point and this point, and you can also imagine, there was a large part of my habilitation script, and I was talking about it, my classical philosopher friends say that what it is, okay? You can say that the establishment of this link bring that nodes to a sort of clusterization that is defines better something conceived before as a node in other languages. That was the original nodes, okay, and so on and so on. That's something that leaded by imagination, but it is more consistent even from the point of view of history of science, of history of knowledge, is more pertinent in order to represent yourself. What's the general dynamic of the views? For example, yesterday we were talking about discursive orders, and you can easily model the establishment of a discursive order by that way. It's not that the power brings the marble blocks and then you have to reason that way. They fibrate, the discursive order as theory fibrate along the history, evolves along the history. For example, I made a research. If you model the evolution between alchemy and chemistry in this way, you can see that certain nodes will be abandoned. That is, no longer the idea of phlogistus belongs to the structure, no longer the idea of inner power of a material belongs to the government, and then they disappear from the context of the theory. They belong, for example, to exotericism or initiatic tradition, and so on and so on. And that those points were then retranslated into physics, into chemistry, you know? If you take the evolution of paradigms, there's not one on-off procedure, okay? We needed, and we discussed it already before, we needed 2 centuries in order to establish the paradigm of modern physics. Because physics is not just destructive, but also conservative. As Copernicus worked on many materials given by the Almagest of Ptolemaios, They integrate nodes, they re-establish link, but this form is one form that is more pertinent in order to represent us non-dogmatically what is the inner life of theories lying on the background of disciplines, okay? Plastic structure, they evolve, they involve, like chemistry or like, I don't know, theories of Paracelsus or something like that, or even old Indian science that has been abandoned from the classical science, coexist in the horizon of our culture, but is no longer linkable to procedure of objective science coming from another context, that is from another structure, and so on and so on. It's not just a way of representation, it's just a better way of representation. And in this way, think interdisciplinarity is more pertinent because you have not the representation of blocks lying together, building blocks. Of course, science, knowledge in general, has a cumulative nature, but not like building blocks. More like the vibration or the rhizomatic vibration of things, okay? And now, just in order to quote, there are always mentioned Albert Laszlo Barabasi, there is an idea of science as you model the publication in this way, and then you have a sort of general site where the science goes. For example, by modeling philosophy and PhD thesis on philosophy, people become aware of the fact, I don't found out the publication for this context, that there is a radical change between analytical philosophy and continental philosophy and theory of science. If even in 2000 or the 90s, 2000, 2010, or 2008, and so on, philosophy of science was belonging to analytical philosophy. Now we assist to the process that philosophy of science, logic, became other autonomous forms, and then they are equidistant, if you will, or as autonomous, not depending from one another, as well thematically analytical philosophy and continental philosophy. For example, you can the people have modeled how, but the people know when you're in the field of logic, that logic, formal logic, had implemented itself to informatics. So now very few people works on logic without working on informatics. So the two structure, informatic computation, that was separated, has begun to frame themselves in order to become almost the same structure with two moduli. And for example, philosophy of science represents a network per se, with more weak links to analytical philosophy, because in the wild, the analytical project has changed. And you can also map how science do go by publication, by PhD thesis, by program, and so on and so on. There's not just something invented by Fausto Fresopi. At the beginning, I had to imagine it, but then I found this final publication and was very happy because things thought in solipsism were not so solipsistic at all. You have in science confirmation or not. Then let's make a step further. And it's a problem that experts in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinarity get. That is, how to implement the heterogeneity of domains. Okay? This is a sketch coming from the first period and in which I had to imagine it alone. Okay? Let's not imagine. Let's suppose that, as we said many times in this course, every discipline or every theory making a discipline project on the ground of experience a portion, that my sector, that is my disciplinary domain, you know, and that is not yours disciplinary domain. That's almost trivial, okay? I work in a domain that's not yours, and they are very distant, if you will, okay? How we can work together? If you speak about apple and apple and bananas, I speak about I don't know, bricks and motors. How we can interact together? We speak about two different things, and in the fact, it's true because every theory implies its own ontology. It's not very. But such representation, okay, is not topological as we've seen with the complex systems. That is the difficult in order to establish beyond languages, formalization, and so on and so on. For example, to let understand a formula to someone that comes from human science and this is 40, 50 years, is very hard. But it's a matter of language, of explanation, and so on and so on. But at the ground lies a sort of background representation. We live in two different worlds of epistemic approach. How we can build correspondence, okay? Proxy function. Yeah, we can also explain, but anyway, the geodesy of our theory is that is like clouds. I make a shadow in this, make my shadow in these points of the landscape. You make the shadow in this point of the landscape, and we cannot share the same topic. Okay, that is the most difficult obstacle to interdisciplinarity, because pluridisciplinarity can be made pragmatically. So we sit together, let's say what it comes. But if you have to intertwine the things, your obstacle is that you have more implicity or not that representation, because it's the representation of domain. So if you speak about practices, you can agree. If you speak about domain, you cannot agree. This is my domain, it's not yours. Point. So if you do not conceive something that crosses these space portions, okay, you cannot take seriously interdisciplinarity. That is the problem. It's a problem for rationality, even from educational point of view. If you remain at this representation, where the space of the domain is a sort of bidimensional space on a plane, you cannot cross the planes. Okay? You cross the planes when you began to shift to another universe, the universe of intertwining topological spaces. We modeled yesterday, we modeled before yesterday, for which we have a clear and relatively well-defined frame. Okay? So it's not true at all that if you model theories or ontologies like networks, we have such representation. Okay? For this reason, here is the sketch very, very precise, and here the sketch is very, very imprecise, because it's sort of matter of our naivety to think the interaction among graphs. As we said before yesterday, a graph entails many topological space as a multi-layered graph. So concretely, if we go to this representation, if we melt or if we begin to establish links of another nature, of course, between nodes of two different graphs, okay? We don't have an A plus B representation. We have a fully new topology. So this representation is abandoned and must be abandoned because we take seriously what the graph is. Okay? So our approach to graph, model, transformation, and so on, is an approach that leads us to overcome the intuitive problem of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, to change our representation in it. For example, if A is modeled as a graph. I have the ontology we said before, okay? And B is a graph 1 and graph 2. The implementation or the establishment of those two, or I don't know, 3 links gives us not a sort of juxtapository sum, as we said, with pluridisciplinarity between 2 domains. It gives us just another graph. So I have to think in this kind of transformation. But I know that implies a transformation, morphism transformation, in another topological space, okay, that can be not the or that must be or is quietly not the juxtaposition of 2 portions of the space, okay, like here. So I can go from here to there, okay. There's 2 different things. I can go, I can come back, but anyway, we handle not with the same things. If we take seriously what a discipline is, what the structure of discipline is, as is the theoretical structure, okay, we can also overcome this difficulty because we don't have to deal with the sum of juxtapository things, like we see precisely in the second degree. Shared topic, but not object, is another thing, topic, and the topic is the place. Topos is the place, okay? So what is a topic? A topic is necessarily disciplinary because we presuppose that a theory throws a sort of light cone on a topos, okay? Communication, but juxtaposition of perspective. Because we lies in the problem that we cannot overcome that representation, okay? And we can, without exploration, since Riemann, topology, and so on, what is the novelty of non-Euclidean geometry and topology lying at the ground of geometry? We think still with figures. That's is our way of thinking, okay? So if I say to you that, and it shows the utility, if you will, even to design interdisciplinarity, I will use in the future, and also use that if you melt or that if you try to fusion, or if you try to wave together 2 different theories corresponding to discipline, you have not the sum of the portion with another portion, of the domain with another domain, But if you have a radical change of the topology of your operating, it's just another thing. You can begin to wave the things together, okay? Because there is no bricks, there is no building blocks, covering tables, and so on and so on. There's just a plain representation and a very plain way of thinking. Interdisciplinarity needs that we swift to the other side of the river, in order to say that it's overcome such representations and being able by imagination, and we come back to the beginning, by imagination, there is not a free fantasy or a sort of daydreaming, okay? Something very, very methodic exercise of variation, would they say, from my origin of eidetic variation, but this open another field, okay? Cross the fields, let intertwine the fields, must be taught not in this way because there is no issue. How I can cross the field lying on the same surface, cross a portion lying on the same surface. I have to imagine what? To ply the surface in order to cross the surface. But for this reason, plying the surface is a topological operation. So topology, studying, if you will, if you are interested, the history of Euclidean geometry and the rise of topology is not just studying on history of mathematics. It's working on your way of representing things, okay? And even to understand science fiction movies, but that is another stuff. So, by imagination and by the work of the concept Anstrengung des Begriffs, I become aware of the fact that field crossed or fields intertwining to themselves are possible just if I go to another way of thinking and to imagining in this topological way. And then I have even tools to do that, because I know that if I think rightly, as we do today, very, very commonly, science and discipline as network, corresponding even to economic network. There is a very, very book from Jürgen Wren, The Evolution of Knowledge, showing that theoretical network correspond also to research network, and so on and so on. If you think theories laying on the background of theory of disciplines in this way, and if we follow our plate imagination to think the dynamic, we don't get the result. We don't go beyond pluridisciplinarity. We cannot. If we think instead not only theories as a graph, think theory as a graph or the theories as a graph, you have huge publication now. It is just sufficient to tape on the computer. You have a huge literature. But the inner dynamics of that associate to complexity, that you have to do the same shift that you have to do in order to think the meta-ontological connex, you have to make in order to overcome the naive and pure dialogical approach to pluridisciplinarity in order to become a work tool on interdisciplinarity. So the space is not longer your domain, the space in we work is no longer my domain, but it's a sort of new kind of space, new kind of speciality, with its own rules. There is not yours or mine, and where evidence criteria has to be abandoned, not because the evidence criterion of physics has to be abandoned at all, but because in this new space becomes a sort of partial aspect of the thing. There is a sort, just one dimension of our meta-ontological connex or attractor. And I will be short because then we can also ask questions about the whole course, okay, not just about this lecture. Then how to proceed in order to animate such work of imagination by sort of interdisciplinary or sort of revolutionary things, that is by copying art and science. So not just because we have pleasure to copy with art on one side and science on another side, because even more advanced program and even professional management program made them aware of the fact that if you take art just as a sort of sum of the artworks present in the world, you kill the sense of the heart. And if you take science just as a static, very, very greedy description by formulas of the world, you can no longer recognize what science is. That is creativity at another higher theoretical level, but it's still creativity. So put this dimension together and conceive that art and science are two sides of the same coin in order to do knowledge, help you to improve your imagination, okay? Today, science is well informed also on art, and there is also science applying itself to art. There is art is very informed in science and technology, but there is still remains pragmatically in the topic defined. Conceive the life of your mind, or das Leben des Geistes, I think it's because it's very, very Hegelian, as a sort of constant osmosis between two things that we consider disciplinary and academically very, very far to each other, help our imagination to work out new structure, okay? As music has always helped mathematician, as painting has always helped mathematician, or as science and technology always helped also artists in order to shape new forms. The idea, if you will, is very, very trivial, but also basic, is that without being able to shape new forms, you cannot be able to understand the new shape of the world that presents yourself in many, many different kinds. So there is not an imaginary world, of course, but without effort of imagination, you cannot reach the goal. There is a very, very, very good phrase of quantum physics. This is Feynman. They say in his lectures, our imagination is stretched as the utmost in order to understand reality. Okay? And this is Feynman. This is a very, very lucid, productive, genius physicist. Okay? Our imagination is stretched as the utmost in order to understand the real. And we are, if you will, with it at the end of our journey, but just in order to reflect on one thing, and we come circularly to the first voyage of Columbus to America. You can remember that one of the first factors of the rise of the new world given by Heisenberg was the first voyage of journey sailing of Columbus to America. Okay? And then there is a very, very good poet, giant of poetry in Italy that made also philosophical works, that is the moral little works, Operette Morali, that imagine Columbus and the second in chief, this is Pedro Gutierrez, speaking just the night before that the land come to the horizon. Okay, so it's just an imagined things, and Gutierrez that, if you will, feel that the crowd is very, very insatisfied. You know the history. So Columbus risked the mutiny at a certain point of the first voyage because he said that they could see the land in a short time, and the land has never come. Okay, so the risk is mutiny, that is to be killed. Okay, so that in fact you have risked your own life and the lives of your companions on behalf of a mere speculative opinion. I cannot deny it, answered Columbus, but apart from the fact that men daily endanger their lives for much frailer reasons and for more thrilling things, or even without thinking at all, pray consider a moment. If you in the fact, and I, and all of us were not now here in this ship, in the middle of this ocean, in this strange solitude, as every man feeling what is faces to a complex world, if I can say, uncertain and hazardous thought it be, what should we be doing? How should we be occupied? How should we be spending our time? More joyfully, perhaps, more probably, in greater trouble and difficulty, or worse, in a state of ennui. For what is implied in a state of life from uncertainty and danger? If contentment and happiness, it is preferable to all others. If weariness and misery, I know nothing so undesirable. I do not wish to mention the glory and useful intelligence that we shall take back with us if your enterprise succeed as we hope. If the voyage be no of other use to us, it's very advantageous inasmuch as it, for a time, free us from ennui, endears life to us, and enhances the value of many things that we should not otherwise esteem. That is not just the sense of a geographical exploration voyage, but it's also the sense of, or the meaning of a theoretical voyage. What is, if you will, the understanding of complexity that all us encompasses. And with this, I thank you so much. So we can anticipate the breaks, or we can still ask questions. Huh? Yeah, we can have a break. So after the break, you can also ask questions about today, because I think this is, you're concerned with disciplinary constraints and so on, but also on the whole, this is a remaining question on the whole course at all. Okay? Thank you. Last chance. Yeah. Yeah. Come here, please.
No, I mean, this has been a perennial question for me, and I was just talking about this with Babu and others that, that we understand, I mean, we can link philosophy with sciences because they have a common origin as well, but social sciences, very late in origin as well, and the entire legitimacy of social sciences lies upon the assumption that there is a field out there which you can observe, and variables are all coming from the field, right?
Yeah.
The reality, and it is taken for granted by and large. So this is not. I mean, so having been built upon, with the entire legitimacy being on the field, which is something very problematic from a philosophical point of view. How isn't it? I mean, the relationship between philosophy and social sciences in itself very tricky. And secondly, I mean, the field itself is constituted of individual societies, groups, etc.,
Yeah.
who have their own subjectivity. So, uh, I mean, this and that makes the relationship between philosophy and social sciences um, even more. I mean, if not indeterminable, I mean, it makes it very vague, ambiguous, etc. Right?
Mm, let's assume that. I don't know that. I don't think that the horizon or the context of social science is more vague as that of natural sciences. Now that is both are become vague, but the vagueness of a domain as we represent is not weakness. So I don't think that philosophy is more unable to approach the social through the social sciences as the natural sciences. So it must be able by an effort of work and imagination to find common patterns. For this reason, I tried very hard to develop meta theory. There is not complete, there is just a tool and so on, like methodology. But anyway, I don't think so. For example, the link in Europe or in France, at least, the link between philosophy and human and social sciences is more pronounced as the link between philosophy and natural science. And people can say no. On the contrary, treating the human philosophy is almost physiologically linked to the field of social sciences, and it can orientate in this field easier as in the natural sciences. So this is very, very subjective feeling. If you give me some example, for example, the relationship or how to handle from the point of view of philosophy with anthropology is not so more difficult than to handle on philosophy of physics. So there is local asperities, but I don't think that the definition of the sharpness of definition of domain in social sciences make it more difficult than for natural sciences. That's so if you give me example, maybe we can discuss. But
No, I mean, and I think in this context also we also need to, I mean, open up the definition of social sciences as well. I mean, the conventional definition of social sciences, which I think is very much modeled based on the old,
Durkheim,
the post Renaissance idea of science that take a hypothesis and then take collect empirical data, verify, etc., or falsify. I mean, that kind of methodology, which is now being, of course, questioned and developed further, but it has to be radically reimagined as well, I think, in this context.
Okay.
So that means opening up the definition of social sciences itself is fundamental to this.
So if you take it is exact, that is, if the social sciences need a I don't know if it is the case of social scientists will accept it, are very, very comfortable in their definition, even if not so too sharp of the natural sciences, they accept it. the problem is not dealing with the field, because we fall in the aporia that we mentioned before. It's dealing with phenomena that we at first can attribute to social sciences, and then if we deal with phenomena, even social phenomena, the singular approaches of a social science must intertwine itself with the other social sciences. So we become in any way the difficulty to think an intertheoretical or an methodological connection in order to think rightly what we are talking about. Maybe where they say internal cooperation among social sciences from an interdisciplinary point of view is easier than in natural sciences, not harder.
Yeah.
That is because, of course, this representation is taken not as belonging to nature itself, but a sort of point of view projected on the thing. It is not in a realistic way. So I will say, but the problem is still the same. That is, if you are anthropologists or ethnologists working together, the difficulty is to think how to structure something, not just dialogically. Then it can build a redefinition of the field of social sciences. But if the redefinition follow as necessary do, this representation is still a mistake. You know, if you think, for example, if you name, for example, with Marcuse after Marcuse, the multidimensionality of man.
Yeah.
Okay? Because, of course, Marcuse formulates the one-dimensional man polemically against the society of production as a new society, okay? Then if you take stance of Marcuse itself and claims that man cannot reduce to one dimension, then logically it's multidimensional. The contours of and the shapes of social science represented in this way are anyway superficial. The way of representation is not adapted to such multidimensionality. So in any way, even by defining better contours or shape of the domain of social sciences, you fall in the aporia that you can represent what is about beyond such naive representation. Yeah? So I'm not, so if people say to me, oh, my goal is to redefine the domain of social sciences, okay? Scientifically is a good enterprise, can be a good enterprise, but a good project. But my first objection was the objection that will come on my mind. Are you sure that this task reveals itself just a mere taxonomy that has nothing to do with the complexity of phenomenon that the social sciences converge to study? Are you sure that the sort of bidimensional representation lying on the ground of your project of redefining the contours is rightly adapted to the task of that the social sciences foresee for the description of human phenomena? I'm not sure. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I have two questions. The first question basically pertains to the nodal structure or the network theory that you demonstrated.
I showed.
Yes. So the three different fields that I will refer to. First is evolutionary biology. They also use the network system in order to trace the origin of different species. And very recently, they discovered that birds or avians, which were earlier considered to be part of mammalia, right? They were basically shown to be closer relatives of the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So earlier they used to say that yes, birds are the closest living relatives of the dinosaurs, but today evolutionary biologists are basically asserting that birds living today, they are in fact dinosaurs. So this was possible because of the nodal structure. In computer science also, the theory of computation, TOC as we call it, we use this nodal structure in order to basically check the feasibility of a particular programming language, where this particular grammatical rules that are offered by a programming language, is it possible to construct a programming language from them? So the third is in social science, and like this is where my question pertains to. There are digital networks. Basically, for example, there are women activists online working together. There are different communities online. So in order to check how these groups function, what they have to offer, we use the nodal structure. So if you can care to elaborate the whole basic dynamics of the nodal structure, that would be great. The second question is, you mentioned that the neo-Euclidean geometry that is used as a way to represent newer things is also used in science fiction. So if you can...
So science fiction uses non-Euclidean geometry and relativity in particular, yeah.
So if you can demonstrate how does that
Okay,
work?
so I won't demonstrate how network science proceed. We showed that just one thing I would suggest, because I suggested even in a very, very interesting workshop we made in the Institute for Advanced Studies about complexity modeling and networks. Network modeling is a very, very plastic and very performing way of, if not the most performing way, to model complex systems. So today is not by chance, is named as the new science, okay? It's applied everywhere. But please don't make the metaphysical mistake to take it as the one and unique way to model complex systems and to conceive complex systems. Because in a way, I will make it short, the taxonomy needed from network modeling erase or put in the background typicities of regional ontologies that cannot be visualized, like causal interrelation at one level, cannot be visualized or modeled by complex systems. So one thing is very useful is a new science. So if you have to do with a new science that apply itself to pandemics, to social group, to networks, you have a new discovery, in fact. So it's huge to follow, to speak with the protagonist, to deepen your understanding. But you have not to take the mistake, what I spoken about, to take it as a new form of matrices universalis. Because instead you fall in metaphysical apories, they're not verifiable. So if you homogenize too much in your mind and think that everything is as a network, like the military researcher that is the world as a network, you lost the localities, or you lost the typicities of certain ontology, and then you lost your grasp on the multi-ontological or many ontological intertwining of the thing, and you are brought to think that, okay, we reach another status, there is no longer differential calculus, there is a network, but we have in the same world, we are in the same world, we have in the same possibility to explain everything with something, like the formula of everything. The formula of everything is a fake, in the best case can be valid for physics, but not for every ontology. So The problem, for this reason, if you will, philosophy is crucial. Because just in philosophy or by philosophical questioning, you can avoid such very, very easy steps to the global, to the whole. Okay? That is the thing. The second question was?
Basically, how new Euclidean geometry is used in science fiction.
Oh, this is massively used. That is science, for this reason, not only I developed it even in I will develop it in the third chapter about science and imagination. I will write, because it's a very, very, very distinct field of topics. So for this reason, interact, art and science is crucial for our building or persönliche Bildung, that is for personal cultural self-construction, because it helps to figure out new ontologies that we don't perceive in reality. I will not say that Ariosto or Cervantes or the perspective in the modern age do not play the same role, do play the same role. But if we have a way to taste how the new science is informing our imaginary, and our science and art come from the same imaginary, now you have to study science fiction. That's just another one. It's omnipervasive. That is, I can introduce even childs to new scientific issues by showing Avengers or some other stuff. Okay, then you have not to remain to it, because there is no difficult to watch a movie or the entertainment movie. It's difficult to develop the structure in order to decrypt the movie by the scientific issues, but in any way, it's for sure today the best field work on which we can notice how profound our imaginary, common imaginary is self-structurating. Okay? Is a new form of, if you will, mythology or cosmogonies, you know? You have to tell the things, and today science fiction, for this reason I also quoted the book, The Philosophy of Black Mirrors, because there is mass philosophical aspect inside. You cannot think there is just entertainment. The outer that are inside, or three-body problems, or comes from people informed, comes from scientists. Let's just consider how many physicians were employed to structure and to visualize the script of Interstellar, you know, of Nolan. This was one of the most remarkable artists today that implement this idea of multidimensionality, okay? Inception and so on, circularity like Tenet and so on and so on. This is huge. But then, in order to recognize that those movies say something not only about the history are telling, but also on our reality, we have to assimilate that those this many dimensionality is not just inherent to the narrative, but show in the mirror something on our dimensions. You know, that's very, very, very intriguing in a way. For me, Nolan is the best, even from a qualitative point of view, because there is knowledge inside. There's not only Oppenheimer, but Tenet and Interstellar are a sort of huge resource of science, but view in the filigrane, if you watch the movie and you enjoy the movie, okay, because very well made, okay? But then looking at the mirror of the movie, or in the mirror of the movie, you can realize something. This is the function of art. You realize something of the self-building world in what we live. That is the most important function of art representation.
I think my questions couldn't have been answered better than this. So thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Anyway, so I'm trying a kind of Ketzerish Fragestellung, where I could not attend most of this, but then the first lectures, which I was there, you started with this, the phenomenon of complexity, saying that that you call someone, and others maybe here in India or Europe, he picks up the mobile and then you talk. You know? You think that out of our habitus, it's so simple. No, it's not simple. It's so complex. That is the complexity involved in the telecommunication. Yeah, so that includes the SCARATE, you know, everything. But I was, that science has moved away from its early modern origins of mechanics, for example. And to my mind, the advent of the modern means the most modern, not post-modern, but the science which we have now, applied science. Also, it's a material. The emergence of material science is very crucial, because before that it was mechanics, optics. It was a different principle altogether, because as you know, in the classical mechanics, there are only a few objects. So, bodies are solid, which can be represented as a point, the Punktmaß, the Newtons. Then free space, forces which are not scalars, mostly vectors, and movement. So, and inertia and gravity, you can add all these forces also. From that, this emergence of material science, and there's a beautiful essay by, I think, Alan Chalmers, from how the pressure from a vector, it became a scalar. So people slowly started observing how you can't just reduce a force into a vector, a mathematical line with a direction. Pressure, for example, warmth, temperature. Because why I'm saying this, because this was suggested by Hasok Chang, my mentor in HPS, Cambridge. We had a discussion about this scale and vector. So then he said he's a philosopher of chemistry, but philosophy of science is dominated by philosophy of mechanics, physics, and other things. And
till a certain time, it was the case.
Yeah. So okay, I'm giving this background thing. In fact, in the philosophical, how it is legitimized in philosophy, I'm trying to reduce the complexity to ask you a question. So when I was in my formative years of philosophy, so I used to read Nietzsche, for example, and quite amazed by the Erkenntnis critique of him. So towards the middle, he develops, he's starting from the birth of tragedy of this, the being, and scrutinizing the being and finding out the Dionysian and Apollonian, shine and Dionysian depth and all. He's moving into a phase where he say, don't do that. He says that we need mask. So he says that mein Individuum sich herum wächst eine Maske.
There is a very good book on Gianni Vattimo, the subject and the mask.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
So this mask, I would say, what's the use of a mask? So, for example, apply to your subject. So first you mentioned telecommunication, a phenomenon of you can, talk to someone in a great distance, like action of distance. So the body, the human body, so your body, for example, from the brain and from how complex it is. It's such a complexity of biological, chemical, electrodynamical, electrochemical, what sort of thing, the brain and all. So it is unbelievable, this complexity. But the point is, you are a body, that's it, covered by a opaque skin and flesh. If for the early modern rationalists, nature is rational, and why the body is opaque? It can be transparent. We would not leave that if you see all what's happening inside. So my point is, It's same with Foucault's, like about the madness also. I mean, we are in a way a masked entity of all madness and all normality, call it, you know. So it's a totality, like a body in classical mechanics. So my question is, there are two ways. Like either you explore the complexity, explore the inner structure, whatever, yeah, and or analysis, in different parts, or you just accept something despite of the complexity as one masked phenomenon. So my question is, isn't it important to understand the natural phenomena, both in its complexities, but also in its masked existence? It's like as nature has created it.
Okay, so very, very good question. Two preliminary remarks as at my the complexity science today one thinks different between with the modern science. There is the objectum is not an objectum purum et simplex. This is anonymous. Yes. Singularities plays the crucial role in order to instantiate complex system. So the singularity or the huge mass of singularity determining a complex system. So my organism is this organism you can experience on a series of trillions or quadrillions of singularity taken by answer, bifurcation, and so on and so on. Just ontogenetically, not phylogenetically. But so the singularity and, if you will, the qualitative of the whole is not erased from scientific approach as it was by classical mechanics. Okay. And in other ways, what is philosophically worth to mention is that I don't bring everything, and this is the principle of locality of the new form of speculative philosophy. I don't bring everything in the schema or in the patterns of the complexity approached epistemologically. From a philosophical point of view, I try to notice at first and then to restructurate according to it how this scandal of complexity must restructure our project of rationality. There is just another thing, There is no I talk, as we say for networks, I talk a general shape of the thing, then everything is that thing. Then the difference do not count. No, the difference count even from the point of view of the internal complexity of everything, if it is complex, because the singularities determines the path on the path behavior, the path dependence, and so on and so on. But then is precisely because complexity is a scandal from sort of generalizing, and we come back to Deleuze yesterday, of a generalizing idea of the unique, that we must to restructure our rationality, how to conceive how different approaches to, for example, to the human or to me, like a biography, like an analysis, and so on, can converge to define what we have to define or to describe what we have to describe. That is also very Husserlian. That is also the crisis of the European sciences. Okay, there is no in this approach a sort of superstition of formalization. I don't take a formal structure and apply automatically the formal structure of the word. The formal structure are two theoretical purposes. One, to rediscover a word that was hidden by classical science, okay, and even to rediscover science, because as I mentioned, the science is not the highest formalization of results. Because of the dynamics of proof, material condition of proofs, technology supporting the proof and the discoveries and so on, but also how this scandal for not only for classical mechanics, but for metaphysics also, implies us force us to redefine what we mean as rational or as episteme and so on and so on. By don't denying that the singularity and the qualitative are crucial for the concrete. For this reason, we talk in the lectures about a concrete instantiation of pluralities of ontology, because the instantiation is what means you don't like analytical metaphysics define the singularities of the individual from model reasonments, but you acknowledge in the singularity a sort of state of your knowledge. And then you, in the mirroring, because this uneasy situation, you restructure your way to think.
In fact, you start with the disciplinarity, and also I worked a bit on that, which is the Lorenz Krüger, that who founded the Professor in Göttingen, who founded the Max Planck Institute for History of Science. One book and one chapter. It's about the axioms and theorems, and also he's saying that these are not really, you call it scientific, it's actually pragmatic. So every axiom is pragmatic. You know? So I mean, of course, that was the way. Of course, he has his argument. So we think that the disciplines are different based on the object of science. Like the biology has an object different from physics or chemistry or whatever chemistry. But there are then merging. Like the chemistry can be organic chemistry or the inorganic chemistry, etc. But finally, the axioms are pragmatic, which is very interesting. But I would say the way the mathematical formalism was deployed by Galileo, by Newton, even by Hooke, Descartes to some extent. But then it's just like, I would say, it's a masking of the phenomena. They just throw the formal mask on it, like gravity. You know, he is trying to find the material cause of gravity, give up Newton, then say, satis est, it's enough that it exists.
Yeah.
So finally...
Like space-time.
Exactly. Inertial movement. You can name it. I mean, the entire Principia, you can say full of masks, mathematical masking. I mean, I'm just a polemical statement. Covering. So always very truthful scientists like Newton tried to play the role of a material scientist, failed miserably. He was a mathematician. So then he used all this axiomatic mask to cover the aporetic, which was discussed in detail for a long time in the medieval scholasticism. So science has this axiomatic, pragmatic program in the history. That's why in some sense this complex studies unmask that in some sense. But at the same time, I wonder, we still need masks to, it's like like Nietzschean question, how much knowledge we need to bear this existence.
No, maybe is this we have to accept, like Pirandello, that there are plurality of masks, and our life is playing on a plurality of masks. But that is just boutade. But anyway, and the reason is because what you say. The reason is because it's a very, very deeply from metaphysics moved science. This is the reason. That is, you think that by going to the abstract, to the first principle, you can erase the aporia lying on the experimental things. But there is not the science of Newton as such. There is a sort of metaphysical program, self-presenting program that brings to this sort of dystopia. One thing, we have the material scientist. On the one side, we have the material scientist, the experimentalist, and even also Descartes. And the other side, we have a sort of metaphysical summing up of the thing. And that is what philosophy learned today, even in a deconstructive way. There are not masks or just narratives, because science is even more the human enterprise to know the world. Let's don't name science or the human enterprise to understand the world. can have a very strong speculative content without being forced to unify it in one narrative. So my thinking or my knowledge, my approach to the world is not weaker because it's plural, okay? Is deeper and even more mature, in order to say. That was changes historically the negative issue of foundationalist program and the rise of complexity science. It's a sort of pure function of uncovering, of demasking what a certain narrative, because as I said, after this program, people don't stop to experience, don't stop to fail, and a scientist use such metaphysics just on Sunday, on the everyday life, is very, very pragmatical, and so on and so on. But our culture has assimilated the fact that without one narrative, we are lost. No, without one narrative, we are not lost. We are more oriented as before. That is the Wirkung, this is the effect of considering these stuff historically on the long term. That is, I'm not sure that we can still adopt a metaphysics, whatever, in order to sum up everything. But I'm also sure that without such illusionary metaphysics or mask, as you call it, our speculative thought, our human enterprise is made weaker from this fact. There's a sort of loss of innocence. When you lose your innocence, you're not weaker at all, you know? You just improve yourself by certain critical point, but you're more present to yourself. And at the same time with this dynamic, very, very clear, recognizable in the modern science and in the ideology or in the metaphysical program of modern science. For this reason, I'm also against those people that now focus Descartes and focus Galileo like very ignorant phenomenologists as the evil of the science, because they take just another narrative. That is homogeneous, that is not critical. So take Galilei as one monolith, take the scientific revolution as monolith, and fail in the aporia of the one narrative, giving account for everything.
Can I have one last point? It's okay. Again, this classical mechanics I am having. So when everything is reduced to point mass or bodies and action and reaction are equal and opposite, all kind of axioms created, the Leibniz opposed, obviously. In case of,
Leibniz is most careful because by recovering the species and by recovering the old substance.
But in the inert bodies or the solid bodies, it's true. But when it comes to living bodies, there's a different thing. But I have a different question. Like, I'm here, so I can move. I don't know how the classical mechanics can explain that, because there are so complex system within me. So it creates my mind and my emotions, everything. I mean, I don't want to explain that. It's very complex. But if, for example, with all this, I need a floor to move, and something to support. So I'm in a way connected with many other objects, which defines my freedom and my, that situation that I'm being caught in. But
even your equilibrium.
Exactly. If I am thrown into the space, nothing will work. If I'm thrown into the space, I'm reduced to a body just like any planet. Because there's nothing I cannot move. Whatever happens in my body, in my complex system, I have to follow either some gravity principle, inertial principle, floating in a space which we don't know why. Still, we don't know. My point is, there are certain, superordinated context, only within which we can discuss these things.
Yeah, the problem is that the over-ordered or the over-layered context at the time could explain everything because the different did count. Now it's just a most generalized things. It's not most true. So if I take my gravitational principle for my movement, it's just a localized approach, you know.
Yeah.
For this reason, I criticize this
I would say
superstition.
it's a terrestrial mechanics, terrestrial, on the Earth.
Yeah, no, there is not a there is a physiological, physiological compounds that make us that you're not a simple object. There's something more complex, and then you have to study with many from many perspectives, and then in this multi-perspectivism or the multifocal perspective, you lost the axiological priority because you lost on information. If you explain yourself as, even if you explain yourself as a working machine, you lost your physiology and so on and so on. So there is the real improvement of our science. So, and why we need philosophy also in order to make cartographies. Because epistemologically speaking, now the local became so important as the global. In a metaphysical perspective, the local, in a metaphysical,
particular or nothing.
You know, that is. I insist, as you said, okay, is huge part philosophy of science, but at the ground, this is a theoretical philosophy, a sort of radical questioning about how the human enterprise focuses itself on questions that must be answered otherwise. So the sense giving, in the sense of Sinngebung, that the rationality by philosophy can give to our fundamental questions, must be structured otherwise. And then it must also, a important question of the fundamental question can be answered in one way. Because instead we fall in this idea of the unique narrative, you know. That is what, how the convergence between history of science, even material science, that was completely, till a certain point, completely put aside from the history of science.
Absolutely,
Yeah, that is instruments, how the instrument contributes to even new insights, mappings for even for navigation, and so on and so on. The certain point, how the convergence between histories of science and histories of philosophy can give us, even the construction of the histories of the metaphysics, of Occidental metaphysics, can give us a certain profound consciousness how to open ourselves to the world in another wise. I made it in the beginning of the course like a sort of exit of an archaic world. We don't exit from an archaic world because the modern world is very elaborated. It's also the cutting edge, like Plato experienced it, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Hic rodus, hic salta. It's not because I like complexity, I like methodology, I like such things that I made this long journey on research, because it's a breaking point, the cutting edge. I can no longer think as Hegel. I can no longer think as Descartes. That is my difficult point.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
So, Christian, I'm sorry.
question related to the history of science, actually. I would say philosophy and science. And a question was asked by Professor Dhruv Raina a few days back. So he was actually asking you about the. Sorry. Sir. So he was asking about the development of science as a joint project. I mean, maybe he was talking about some histories coming from him, histories of science coming from the Arab world, where he talked about that how Galileo or Copernicus worked on the calculations that were actually worked in different observatories in the maybe Central Asian or in the Arab world. So if I make you an example, I would say that, for example, there was this scientist Nasiruddin Tusi. So he was the head of, I think, this Al Maraga observatory, and where he was working on these, I mean, planetary motions and other things. So I could see one of the scholars in Cambridge who shows us a manuscript of Copernicus and saying that, see, what Copernicus does here on one of the pages of the book, of the manuscript, that he simply copies one of the figures, actually, which was found in the works of Nasiruddin Tusi, who was the head of that observatory. And there's a famous figure, actually, that he drew to kind of understand the planetary motion. So it's called Tusi couple. So it's kind of, there's a circle, and within the circle there are two other circles. So they are revolving inside that bigger circle. So it somehow explains some, I mean, phenomena, planetary phenomena. So the scholar says that, see, this is the figure that Copernicus has taken from Tusi, and then he just kind of replaced the Arabic numerals by Latin or Roman numerals. So so in that way, it seems like these, like Copernicus or I would say Galileo, they had some kind of data available to them, which was coming from some other civilization, maybe, if you may say, if you will. So now my question is actually, if you look at the metaphysics, actually, or the, I would say, ontology that people like Tusi, they were working in.
People like?
I mean, Nasiruddin Tusi, the person I'm talking about, the Arab physicist. So it was quite different from, I think, or from Galileo or Copernicus, because it was for Galileo and Copernicus, they were kind of transitioning from the medieval ontologies or medieval astronomical models to the modern ones. But then when we see the shift, I mean, the shift that the theories of, I would say, Galileo or Copernicus, they affected in the world. So like maybe that started with scientific revolution, and we came to maybe kind of abhor or reject the medieval like theories, astronomical theories, or theories of science and other things. So my question is actually, how does metaphysics actually, I would say, affect the development of theories?
Which metaphysics?
I mean, metaphysics, I would say, ontology, I mean, how we see the being itself, how we see existence itself as a whole. Is that clear? I would say being as such, how we understand that thing. So if, I mean, people like, again, Tusi and other scientists who are working in these observatories, they were working in I would say, in the framework, metaphysical framework, which was, of course, medieval in structure, like Ptolemaic astronomical models. But as far as I know, one of the historians of science, who was Professor Syed Nasser, who was working in George Washington University. He's a philosopher of science and, of course, a historian. So he talks about how these scientists, they had this idea of that, they had the idea of that Ptolemaic model maybe does not, I would say, the kind of, it must be rejected in the sense that it's not correct. They knew it. They have some idea of it. That it's not correct. But still, they didn't maybe create or develop such theories where it could be maybe kind of revealed to the whole, I mean, people or the world, because they knew that the metaphysics that it would need to interpret these new theories, they didn't have that metaphysics available to them. So they kind of, I would say, kept it opaque, as Sir was talking about. So, but then the critique he makes of, I mean, Descartes and Galileo, he says that, see, when they developed these theories, I mean, mechanistic theories of universe, maybe they were kind of a bit skeptical about how it would change the whole world. Because we know that Newton was a theologian as well. He wrote commentaries on the Bible. So my question would be that, I mean, what if, how does our understanding of being actually affect the development of theories in science? So, or is it the thing that we have some metaphysical foundations upon which we build some theories, or is it the other way around? We develop theories of science first, then we try to interpret it in different metaphysical frameworks.
No.
But is it bidirectional?
There is just by interpreting that, for example, as evolving graph, you have not sort of a metaphysics and then a corpus of scientific issues. They nourish themselves along the history. So there is not a sort of same metaphysics from Galilei to Descartes to Newton. There is a sort of project of rationality that let evolve metaphysics in that way, but there is no sort of one-to-one influence either from metaphysics to science or to science of metaphysics. This is very simplistic. You know, there is a sort of project of rationality. For this reason, I talk about project of rationality without accusing Descartes or Newton to have done something, okay, very, very dangerous. There is a project of rationality to put the man as technological active actor in his world. And then this project of rationality, nourished by new anthropological feeling, nourished by discourses on theology and so on, all this complex organism of ideas brings to a metaphysics that is unificating and so on. But the problem is now that there is, while there is no longer a metaphysics for all that thing, people try to establish informational metaphysics in order to make the same game, but it's not valid. Considering the fact there is no longer not only one metaphysics, but we become aware that this relationship is very problematic, if not aporetic. Philosophical thinking can interact with science without deciding who or what determines what. Sort of an osmotic field. That is what I would suggest. It's just a new representation of even interaction about this core within man ask fundamental question and the knowledge around or the knowledge that describe the world. This is a very new kind of relationship because we can no longer presuppose that at the end we can formulate one metaphysics for the whole world. This is the end of metaphysics, not because we don't have metaphysical systems, because we become aware of the fact, and once become aware, we cannot deny the fact, that metaphysics depends on so many factors, also two way to conceive the world, but presupposed to be unique. Okay? So the loss of unicity or the loss of the possibility of a unique metaphysics for the whole world let proliferate on one side philosophical thinking, even maximal speculative, and the other side the science without having to determine what determines what. If the science determines the metaphysics, or the metaphysics determines the science, or the political condition determines both, or if both determine the political condition. You know, this sort of very simplified way to think that something in block influences something other in block still depends from that simplistic way. You know, like the domains and so on. What is very, very challenging for us, because we have also to restructure the way by which we think the interaction between culture and society, science and society, science and culture, and so on, as a sort of very modular, plastic structure interacting, and not as a block interacting or conflicting. For example, at that time, there was till the Enlightenment or positivism, we were told about the radical opposition between science and theology. Now, even by issues on history of science, we know that the program was an emancipation from theology of the church, but there is no independence, as you mentioned, between theology and philosophy and physics by Newton, even by Descartes. So the problem is think simply by patterns that we have used to use or to apply to phenomena. They're not simply at all, even meta-theoretically. You know, that's the problem.
Yes, sir. I have one more question, may I ask? A bit general actually, but still I would like to ask actually. It's not related to what we actually, like what we did in the course, but a bit general. That would be, I have a question that I've been asked, like I've been asking to so many people for years. That would be, what's the difference between a scholar of philosophy and a philosopher? Sorry, but I would, if I may.
Creation of concept and work on support this creation with a consistent background.
So
There's the act of the gesture to create, this is very Deleuzian, if you will, to not know to see otherwise, but to give names and shapes and definition and vibration that is otherwise. This is the accuse to be systematic, okay? What is today is a sort of shame to be systematic or to put, for example, into philosophy something like a methodological connex. Then I don't know, this is too meta-philosophical in order to be answered, but anyway, there is a sort of hybris gesture, okay? There is, I not only see the things otherwise or more in detail, but I forge a new conceptual constellation of concept, a new structural constellation of concept able to give to my view by a new language or by a very refined language, the grasp on the novelty I'm seeing. That's.
thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask from here? Okay. This is a two-part question. The first question is a rather naive question and very particular as well. So, take for example the enterprise of truth conditional semantics. Right? Is it an interdisciplinary approach to meaning because it takes into account the concepts that we use in linguistics and all of that? But you know, we have been doing truth conditional semantics for so long in philosophy of language that it seems as if it lies in the discipline of philosophy itself, of philosophy of language. So to think that, well, we use concepts from linguistics and all, that is what makes it interdisciplinary. I mean, it doesn't feel that much correct now, given we are doing it for so long. So what do you think? Should we think of the enterprise of truth conditional semantics as being interdisciplinary, or is the idea of what constitutes as interdisciplinary itself evolving?
No, I don't say we cannot so straight that we are not a criterion of where interdisciplinarity comes from. It can be pragmatically emerge and then by scientific purpose and needs and then coded, or you can project an interdisciplinarity and then try to translate it pragmatically, what is harder as the first task. So there is no directionality. This is interdisciplinarity is not something top-down or fully bottom-up. But the necessary structural condition is that you must be able to frame or to fibrate the elements of your true theory. There is the distinction. There is no sort of orientation point. Everything is pragmatic, of everything is theoretically. No, you can also find a certain state by certain pioneeristic approach for new school, I don't know what, but the possibility to translate it in an educational program is to work structurally on the vibration of the two networks, you know?
And my other question is particularly related to what you just pointed out. You mentioned in the lecture today that you said well, it's better that like in the undergraduation course, we focus more on the foundational aspects of a particular discipline, and maybe in the masters we sort of look beyond the discipline and try to go interdisciplinary. And in the PhD, we can introduce transdisciplinarity, right?
Well, following according also the maturity of the people. Yeah.
Right. So, but then you see, I was thinking about if, let's say, today at this age, if someone wants to work on say, so something that I'm working on, sir, I'm working on generic generalizations, the semantics of generic sentences, expressions, right? So, is it out of fashion to work on generics as a PhD dissertation, particularly as a purely, from a purely truth conditional semantic approach, right? Is it out of fashion? Is it not, or does it make it even more valuable to do so, given the complexity in the subject matter? So generics is a very complex topic, and to try and find a theory, a truth conditional theory, which explains the meaning of these very complex generalizations, is not the case that it makes it even more complex and therefore much more worthy to pursue an approach like this?
I will not adopt such normative issues. So I'm not against very specific pointed PhD program.
Right.
Okay. I just say that in the best case we can open to interdisciplinarity in the master, but in my view, in the PhD, it will be not mean that all PhD must be interdisciplinary. I'm always, in order to keeping the strong formation of Spartans, disciplinary Spartans, very, very active. Okay.
So it is a generic suggestion, is what
Yeah?
it is. It is a generic suggestion that has
Yeah,
accepted.
no, I'm saying that I'm fully against to make everything together at the beginning. Eventually, on the PhD, if you will establish, or master or PhD, if you will to build people to openness of thinking, then openness of issues, and then let proliferate science. But it cannot be at the cost of pure theoretical issues internal to discipline.
Right.
That's for sure. This is just a politics, huh? Because people say, okay, we must be interdisciplinary. Then physicists, chemists, even sociologists or anthropologists say, no. Which form of knowledge that we have, I would say, is a right question.
Yes,
Because we cannot take the whole for the part. The interdisciplinary programs are useful when there are strong acquisition of knowledge. When you have weak acquisition of knowledge, the organism of your formation go too low. This is one thing. Another thing is to provide formation or to provide education, even in the very, very strength meaning of the word, with a sort of opening scope of your thinking. So you have not to build PhD students as sort of autistic performers of their discipline, but that depends sort of the general opening of university, of a culture as such, So you can also build very intelligent people strongly disciplinarily by giving the idea that's beyond the scheme, something other, that's beyond there is possible link to establish with technology that is transdisciplinary, with other discipline that is interdisciplinary, without erasing the disciplinary function. This is sort of poor binary dynamics, either disciplinary or multidisciplinary. This is very wrong. Organisms do not function in this way, and even our university that are organisms cannot function in this way.
Yeah, that's very well answered. Because you see, from the lectures that I attended, it seems as if what you're suggesting there's a need for us to introduce interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches to knowledge, but then there is also a danger to sort of introduce this approach to things which should rather not be looked at by that approach, where there needs to be some core foundational approach to that topic, and then it
Yeah.
develops into something, and then we can try and connect it with other things. Is that correct?
Yeah. There is, you have to, your education policy must be adapted to complexity. As in complexity, there is holonomic constraints that can correspond to your policy of education to a general connectivity of our disciplines. There are also non-holonomic constraints. There are, in a complex organism, for this reason we explain the note of complexity. There are modules in an organism that works very, very locally with one ontology. You cannot think the complexity of education by erasing the particularities, as we said. There's just futurism that brings nowhere in another way. So if you assimilate not only the rhetoric of transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, but the reason why we need transdisciplinarity, that is the complexity, and you study the multi-levels, layered ontologies and holonomic and non-holonomic constraints, you cannot affirm that everything must be interdisciplinary. Because you lost even the strength of some disciplines that brings nutrition, brings lymph to the interdisciplinarity you have to build. Okay.
Thanks.
So it's
Yeah. So this is the end of a long journey. 10 lectures, not very easy, every day. And
thank you.
I know it's not easy because, very intensive, not because of the time we have spent afternoons for 10 days, but the intensity. And because of the subject matter. So I thank Professor.
No, thank you for the
Fausto
invitation. It was a
Faisopi.
beautiful journey at the beginning of one another that everyone must deal with oneself or with fellows.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's just a beginning, I would say, because for me also, though I could not be an active participant, but still an occasion, when Germans say Anlass, to start with some, or to refresh, to get back or to regain something which has lost in between in this university out of various reasons. So there should be a beginning, and Professor Faisopi is here till 23rd, and he's flying back to Strasbourg, or Germany, Strasbourg, and then again start teaching in Marseille. So anyone you like going to Europe or
of course.
Marseille,
well
please
welcome.
stop in and meet him, but keep in touch that online, though it is very complex system.
And even if you will, because it was so challenging, many times, even the last time, if you will recover the videos in order to refresh, maybe it's better, because one thing, what this is not heard and assimilated, is online. The program made that will be online for everyone, even for the presence, because there are some points that must be reviewed and so on and so on. This is pedagogical strategy, like a text and so on. Okay.
Yeah, like there are certain aspects, like first of all the study of complexity, but before that the phenomenon of complexity that exists. And I just remind me of, like, earlier when I was so excited to Bildbearbeitung, the photoshopping and JPEG, creating JPEG from PDF, and then sometimes it fails, and out of a small image, the length of the text, in the computer, which you won't make out. It's so complex, and so that's why I asked this question of masking. So I would rather see the image, not the complexity, because it horrifies me. It's like a surgery, you know. So, but still, as we know, the knowledge, or the striving for knowledge, that the streben, you know, that it will cross every boundaries. You
Yeah.
know, because as Aristotle say, we are in we are. If he said, Aristotle said, we have a natural disposition to knowledge, I would say we are contempt to know, and that's how we advance in our scientific endeavor. So I thank Fausto once again, and hopefully we'll see you later,
Thank you.
and in India or in Europe. Thanks so much.
Thank you too.